Poverty, an ambiguous enough idea. For years, people have debated its meaning and implications, and for years, people continue to do so, wrestling with the big questions. What causes poverty? Is there someone to blame? How can it be eliminated? Who is responsible for eliminating it? Today, we're going to try tackling two. The first, how can poverty be defined? Poverty is oftentimes defined in an obscure way, a way that leaves a person with more questions than they started with. Some believe that poverty should refer to severe states of material or economic deprivation. Others say that poverty should be defined by what John Iceland refers to as, quote, a condition of comparative disadvantage based on the notion that poverty is relative to a society's existing level of economic, social, and cultural development. If you go by dictionary.com's very own definition, poverty is simply the condition of being poor. The way in which one describes poverty is reflective of the motivational underpinnings of an individual or institution's poverty analysis, a term coined by Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum in The Quality of Life. In layman's terms, one's motivational underpinning of poverty analysis is the reason for studying poverty in the first place, and it can take many forms. The motivation driving our concern with poverty, people.
We have decided to define poverty as the inability to achieve well-being, which results from a deficit in generating the capabilities typically afforded to one with sufficient economic means.
Our definition is heavily based on the idea of capability pioneered by Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen. As they explain in The Quality of Life, the capability approach to poverty is based on a view of life as a combination of various beings and doings, with the quality of life to be assessed in terms of capability to achieve valuable functionings. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Functionings, capability, value? I'm going to try to explain this in as painless a way as possible. The building block of capability is functionings. Functionings reflect the various things a person manages to do or be on a day-to-day basis. Examples could include being sufficiently nourished and being in good health. The capability of a person, on the other hand, is determined by the various combinations of these functionings that a person can plausibly achieve given their circumstances. Consider the person who is sufficiently nourished and in good health. One could reasonably infer that due to the combination of these two functionings, he or she would have the capability to prevent frequent sickness and avoiding premature death. Capability depends on a variety of factors, including personal, familial, and societal characteristics. Interwoven and crucial to the relationship between functionings and capabilities is the idea of freedom of choice. As Nussbaum describes in Creating Capabilities, the human development approach, a person who is starving and a person who is fasting have the same type of functioning where nutrition is concerned, but they do not have the same capability, because the person who fasts is able to not fast, and the starving person has no choice. With our definition of poverty in mind, ask yourself, can the entire scope of poverty and its effects truly be measured in strict quantifiable terms? Should it? And with that, we move on to guiding question number 2. How can poverty be measured? The United States government would have you believe that poverty can be measured on the basis of income alone. Specifically, that there is a measurable level of income or consumption below which people should be deemed economically disadvantaged or deprived. In the 1960s, policymakers devised the official poverty measure, which set the threshold constituting poverty by multiplying the average low-cost food budget, known as the Economy Food Plan, by 3, as it was determined that people during this time spent 1/3 of their income on food. To determine which families or individuals are living below the poverty line, the OPM compares a family's income, described as gross annual pre-tax income, to the threshold previously described. The problems with the OPM can be summed up in a few key central facts. 1. It does not consider non-discretionary spending, including expenses that are necessary to hold a job and to earn income, such as transportation or childcare costs. 2. It is outdated. Though prices are updated to keep up with current rates of inflation, it is not an accurate representation of how people spend their incomes in 2017. It also doesn't adjust for rising standards of living that have occurred since 1965. 3. It fails to adjust for price fluctuations based on geographical locations. One of the biggest problems with OPM, however, is the fact that it does not reveal the time individuals spend in poverty. Chronic meaning long-term or episodic short-term. This information is relevant in determining whether governmental benefits or policies are effective in alleviating poverty. If a majority of the population is in chronic poverty, then current efforts need to be reevaluated. Poverty is measured this way in the United States. That doesn't mean it should be. It seems that some discontent with the current official poverty measure has been stirring in the world of poverty researchers and policymakers for a while now, prompting Congress to allocate resources for the research of the Supplemental Poverty Measure, a measure which would be released alongside the official poverty measure each year and would account for many of OPM's weaknesses. A key difference between the SPM and the OPM is the way in which they define a family's income or resources. Resources under the SPM are the value of cash income from all sources, reflecting the impact of in-kind benefits such as SNAP or TANF. It can also be noted that the SPM subtracts non-discretionary expenses, accounting for a family's potential to face exorbitant costs, such as child support payments, Social Security taxes, or medical out-of-pocket costs. The SPM threshold is calculated by multiplying the cost of FCSU, or food, clothes, shelter, and utilities, by 1.2 to give families some wiggle room for costs not reflected in FCSU and non-discretionary costs. The FCSU cost is derived by looking at the 33rd percentile of cost reported by the Consumer Expenditure Survey. Even though SPM is more closely connected to an individual or a family's actual income through the addition of tax credit and in-kind benefits and subtraction of necessary expenses, it does not change the fact that SPM is still wholly income-based. By characterizing each familial situation by a cash number, the basics of human dignity is violated and freedom is suppressed. So maybe the question is better presented as,
how should poverty be measured? We believe that the best way to measure poverty is to integrate the SPM with components of Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach, specifically her 10 central capabilities.
The capabilities approach sets parameters in an attempt to define basic human capabilities that would otherwise decrease the quality of life and limit freedom. The nature of measuring poverty in terms of capabilities differs from measures focused solely on material or economic deprivation, in that, as Nussbaum states, is focused on choice or freedom, holding that the crucial good society should be promoting for their people is a set of opportunities which people then may or may not exercise in action. The choice is theirs. She emphasizes that policy geared towards promoting, say, health capabilities rather than health is one that honors an individual's lifestyle choices, while at the same time providing a context for choice. This approach is also described as pluralist about value, holding that the achievement of the central capabilities comprising well-being and strengthening human dignity are different in both quality and quantity. Implicit in this is the notion a lack of capability in one area is not up for compromise. It cannot be replaced by a larger amount of another. If our goal is to use a list of capabilities as the basis of public policy, we must take a stance on the value of each. In doing so, we must address a number of considerations: the unique handicaps that individuals might face in converting income into capabilities, the complex relationship of capabilities, social injustice, and equality, the role that trade-offs and tragic choices play in placing values on capabilities, and the appraisal of human dignity when setting minimal capability thresholds. We must also pay heed to a number of concerns. Critics of the capability approach to poverty question to what degree of accuracy can you measure an individual's potential in order to compare it to a threshold of minimal achievement of capabilities. There is also the question of how to define such a threshold. John Iceland explains these reservations and methods of measuring poverty by saying, quote, statisticians can model and describe the typical earnings of people of different demographic groups, but these models inevitably have limited predictive power, and there is also considerable variation in actual family outcomes. Speculation surrounds how to measure capability in strict quantifiable terms.
Our immediate response is this: why should we need a detailed measurement of an individual's potential? Okay, so hear me out. If we can begin to regard capabilities as essential rights of all citizens, of course we still need guidelines for what is to be considered an infringement of those rights. But, just as perceived violations of the rights afforded to us by our very own U.S. Constitution are up for constant debate and individual judgment, we can expect a reasonable amount of dissension and speculation surrounding one's inability to pursue the basic capabilities comprising a dignified, free, sustainable human existence. If the laws that govern our country don't employ a list of quantitative measurements explicitly determining what constitutes a violation of rights, why should the capability approach to poverty, for the time being, need to specify a threshold determining whether or not a person's capability is being hindered or dignity being compromised? The task of fine-tuning and implementing such a measure is without saying a difficult feat, and as long as there are genuine ambiguities in the concept of value, freedom, and dignity, there will be corresponding ambiguities in the characterization of capability. But as Samuel Johnson so aptly put, and as Professor Pickett loves to reiterate, the fact that there is such a thing as twilight does not mean that we cannot distinguish between day and night.
This customized approach to measuring poverty takes the fundamental aspects of the supplemental poverty measure and combines them with an emphasis on dignity, equal opportunity, and context for choice, afforded by addressed in Martha Nussbaum's 10 Central Capabilities. A more accurate representation of both the breadth and depth of poverty is one that doesn't solely rely on income, but one that takes into account individual circumstances and complex societal and economic characteristics, and the relationship between poverty and capabilities. As Amartya concludes in Equality, Reexamined, a poverty analysis that concentrates only on incomes can be quite remote from the main motivation behind our concern with poverty: the limitation of the lives that some people are forced to live.
And that's just it, isn't it? We must make it a priority to remember the humanity of the people affected when we talk about poverty. These aren't just numbers in a report or figures represented in a chart. These are people whose needs extend beyond wealth and material possessions. They encompass meaningful relationships and intellectual stimulation and creative outlets and the capability to do, achieve, and become. These are living, breathing human beings with potentials and imaginations and ideas and feelings and desires. It's time we started treating them as such.